In the misty shadows of 1930s, Pinewood Studios, A Star is Silenced, Clara Vane found strangled with her own silk scarf on a glittering film set. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, unravelling a web of ambition, obsession, and betrayal. A volatile director, a jealous co-star, a lovesick assistant, and a fanatical devotee all had reasons to kill. With a green bead, a smudge of talcum, and a hidden lie, Miss Marple weaves the clues to a shocking confession, proving no secret stays buried in the spotlight. Chapter 1. The Scene of the Crime. The autumn mist draped itself over St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's tidy cottages and winding lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her chintz-curtained drawing-room, her fingers deftly working a pair of knitting needles, coaxing pale pink wool into the delicate pattern of a shawl. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow on the familiar clutter of her home. China teacups, a silver-framed photograph of her nephew Raymond, and a stack of library books on gardening. It was a morning for quiet reflection, but the sharp rap of the postman's knock disrupted her reverie. A telegram lay on the silver tray presented by her maid, Cherry, whose bright eyes betrayed curiosity. "From London, miss," Cherry said, lingering a moment too long. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and slit the envelope with a letter opener, her movements precise. The message was brief, penned in the clipped urgency of her old friend, Detective Inspector Dermot Craddock of Scotland Yard. Clara Vane, actress, found strangled at Pinewood Studios. Urgent you come. Discretion assured. Craddock, Clara Vane. The name stirred a memory. A local girl, born Clara Potts, who had once played fairies in the village pageant before her star ascended in London's glittering firmament. Her death, so violent and sudden, sent a shiver through Miss Marple, not of fear, but of resolve. She folded the telegram, her mind already sifting through possibilities. "Cherry," she called, "pack my small valise. I shall take the midday train." The journey to Pinewood Studios was a study in contrasts. The pastoral calm of St. Mary Mead gave way to the clamour of London, then to the sprawling, artificial world of the film studios. Miss Marple, in her sensible tweed coat and felt hat, felt like a sparrow among peacocks as she stepped onto the lot. Assistants scurried with clipboards, cameras loomed like mechanical beasts, and the air buzzed with the frenetic energy of creation. Craddock met her at the gate, his lean face etched with fatigue, his grey eyes betraying the strain of a case already tangled. "Good of you to come, Miss Marple," he said, shaking her hand. "It's a grim affair." Clara Vane was found at dawn, strangled on the set of The Crimson Veil. Silk scarf, her own, knotted tight. The crew's in shock, and no one's talking straight. They walked through a maze of sound stages, past carpenters hammering flats and electricians wrestling cables, until they reached stage 3. The set was a Regency drawing room, all gilt mirrors and velvet drapes, frozen in a state of opulent disarray. A chalk outline marked the spot where Clara had lain, stark against the plush Aubusson carpet. A chair stood askew, a teacup sat untouched on a mahogany table, and a script lay open, its pages fluttering faintly in the draught. Miss Marple's keen eyes darted about, noting the details. A smudge of grease paint on the armrest, a faint scuff on the polished floor, the absence of any struggle. "No signs of a fight," Craddock remarked, following her gaze. "She was taken by surprise, we think. The scarf was hers, monogrammed, left on that chair. anyone could have picked it up. Miss Marple knelt, her knees protesting, to examine the chalk outline. A personal touch, Inspector. The scarf suggests intimacy, or at least access. Who was here last night? Craddock sighed. That's the trouble. The studio was locked, but the night watchman's rounds are irregular. We've got 4 main suspects: Lionel Drake, the director, Sylvia Gray, her co-star, Tom Harris, a young assistant, and Evelyn Marsh, a fan who got herself hired as an extra. They're all claiming innocence, of course. Miss Marple straightened, her expression serene, but her mind alight. Of course, she murmured, her voice soft as the rustle of her knitting. In my experience, Inspector, innocence is often the loudest claim of all. Now shall we meet these players in your little drama? They moved to the canteen, a cavernous room filled with the clatter of trays and the murmur of gossip. The suspects sat apart, each an island of tension. Lionel Drake, a burly man with a florid face and a voice that carried, was gesticulating to a nervous assistant. Sylvia Gray, sleek and golden-haired, sipped coffee with studied poise, her eyes flicking toward the door. Tom Harris, barely out of boyhood, hunched over a cup of tea, his fingers drumming. Evelyn Marsh, plain and fidgety, clutched a dog-eared photograph, her lips moving silently as if in prayer. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side, and observed them with the quiet intensity of a hawk. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where secrets hid behind lace curtains and motives lurked in polite smiles. Here, in this artificial world of lights and shadows, human nature was no different. "Tell me, Inspector," she said, her needles clicking rhythmically, "what sort of woman was Clara Vane?" Craddock hesitated. Ambitious, talented, a bit of a diva, they say. Rubbed people the wrong way, but she had a gift. Miss Marple nodded, her mind drifting to Miss Clara Potts, the girl who had once charmed the village with her mimicry and dreams. Ambition, she knew, could be a spark or a flame. "Let us begin, then," she said. For someone, that gift was a threat worth killing for. Chapter is 2. The Players. The air in Pinewood Studios' canteen carried a peculiar blend of stewed tea, cigarette smoke, and nervous anticipation. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her small, neat figure almost lost amidst the clatter of trays and the low hum of whispered speculation. Her knitting needles moved with mechanical precision, the pale pink wool forming a delicate lace pattern. But her eyes, bright, sharp, and deceptively mild, missed nothing. The canteen, with its chipped formica tables and posters of past cinematic triumphs plastered on the walls, was a stage of its own, and the players in Clara Vane's tragedy were assembled before her. Detective Inspector Craddock stood nearby, his notebook open, his expression one of weary determination. He had briefed Miss Marple on the 4 suspects, but she preferred to see them for herself, to catch the unguarded flicker of an eye or the unconscious tightening of a hand. Human nature, she often remarked to her nephew Raymond, was like her garden. Beneath the orderly surface, roots tangled in unpredictable ways. Here, in this artificial world of grease paint and illusion, those roots were already twisting into something dark. She sipped her tea, served in a thick white mug that bore faint stains of countless lips, and observed the suspects. Lionel Drake, the director, occupied a table near the counter. His broad shoulders hunched as he barked orders at a trembling assistant. His voice, resonant and commanding, carried the weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sylvia Grey, Clara's co-star, sat alone by a window, her golden hair catching the weak November light, her posture as composed as a portrait. Tom Harris, the young assistant, fidgeted at a table cluttered with empty sugar packets, his boyish face pale and his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Evelyn Marsh, the fan, hovered near the edge of the room, her plain brown dress blending into the shadows, her hands clutching a crumpled photograph of Clara Vane. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a metronome to her thoughts. She recalled a village fete years ago, when Mrs. Price's sudden death had revealed a web of envy and spite among the seemingly genial competitors. Here, too, she sensed a web, its threads spun from ambition, devotion, and perhaps betrayal. Craddock approached, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum floor. "They're ready to talk, Miss Marple," he said quietly. "I've set up a small office for the interviews. Shall we start?" "Not yet, Inspector," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Let me watch a little longer." People reveal themselves when they think no one's looking. Craddock nodded, accustomed to her methods, and retreated to confer with a constable. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and let her gaze linger on Lionel Drake. He was in his late 40s, with a mane of greying hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the deep lines of frustration etched around his mouth. His hands, large and restless, gestured expansively as he spoke to the assistant, who scribbled notes with the desperation of a man trying to keep pace with a storm. Drake's latest film, The Crimson Veil, was to be his masterpiece, or so the gossip columns claimed. Clara Vane, as Lady Eleanor, was its centerpiece, a role that demanded both grace and fire. But Drake's temper, Miss Marple noted, was a fire of its own. She thought of Mr. Clements, a St. Mary Mead grocer, whose rages masked a deeper insecurity. Was Drake's bluster a shield, or a weapon? Her eyes shifted to Sylvia Grey, who was stirring her coffee with a silver spoon, her movements deliberate and graceful. Sylvia was younger, perhaps 30, with the kind of beauty that seemed crafted for the screen. High cheekbones, wide blue eyes, and a mouth that curved just enough to suggest secrets. She wore a tailored green dress that accentuated her elegance, but there was a hardness in her gaze, a calculation that belied her serene exterior. Miss Marple remembered Miss Lavinia Grey, a distant cousin of Sylvia's who had once visited St. Mary Mead, and left a trail of broken hearts and whispered scandals. Ambition, Miss Marple knew, could be a quiet poison, seeping into the soul until it demanded everything. Sylvia's role as Lady Eleanor's rival in the film was secondary, but with Clara gone, she would step into the spotlight. A motive, perhaps, as old as the theatre itself. Tom Harris caught her attention next. He was barely 20, his lanky frame awkward in a too-large jacket, his brown hair falling into eyes that held a mix of fear and defiance. He tore another sugar packet, spilling granules onto the table, and glanced nervously toward Sylvia, then away. His devotion to Clara had been evident in Craddock's briefing. Tom had been her errand boy, her shadow, fetching scripts and coffee with a puppyish eagerness. Miss Marple thought of young Tommy Pierce, a village lad whose adoration of a schoolteacher had led to petty thefts in a bid to impress. Devotion could curdle into obsession, and obsession into something darker. Tom's hands trembled slightly. Fear of discovery or guilt? Evelyn Marsh was the enigma. Plain, with mousy hair pinned haphazardly, and a face unremarkable save for the intensity of her eyes, she seemed out of place among the polished egos of the studio. Her fingers clutched the photograph of Clara, its edges worn from constant handling. She had won a contest to appear as an extra, Craddock had said, a prize for her relentless fandom. Miss Marple recalled Mrs. Green, a St. Mary Mead widow who had fixated on the vicar, her devotion turning to bitterness when he married another. Evelyn's adoration of Clara was palpable, but adoration could twist into rage if it felt betrayed. Her presence on the set, so close to the crime, was a thread Miss Marple intended to tug. The canteen began to empty as the crew returned to their tasks, leaving the suspects in sharper relief. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but purposeful, and nodded to Craddock. "Now, Inspector, let us hear what they have to say." The office was a cramped affair, its walls lined with schedules and faded posters. A single desk held a typewriter and a stack of police forms, and a narrow window let in a sliver of grey light. Craddock had arranged for the suspects to be interviewed one by one, and Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, her demeanour that of a kindly aunt. But her mind was a steel trap, ready to catch the slightest inconsistency. Lionel Drake entered first, his presence filling the room like a gust of wind. He flung himself into the chair, his tie askew, and fixed Craddock with a belligerent stare. "This is absurd," he began, his voice booming. "I've got a film to finish, and you're wasting my time with this nonsense. Clara was difficult, I'll grant you, but I didn't kill her." Miss Marple tilted her head, her needles clicking softly. "Difficult, Mr. Drake? In what way?" Her tone was mild, inviting confidence. Drake's eyes flicked to her, momentarily thrown by her presence. "She was a prima donna," he said, his hands gesturing wildly. "Always demanding changes, new lines, new costumes, new blocking. Thought she was the only star in the picture. But I was in my office all night, rewriting her blasted scenes. Ask my secretary." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unchanged. "Alone, Mr. Drake, at such an hour?" She thought of Mr. Bantry, whose late-night paperwork had once concealed a dalliance. Men like Drake, she knew, often hid their weaknesses behind a wall of noise. He flushed, his jaw tightening. "Yes, alone. I don't need company to work." Craddock scribbled a note. "We'll check with your secretary. Anyone else see you?" Drake hesitated, just a fraction too long. Number it was late. The studio was quiet. Miss Marple's needles paused. A lie, perhaps, or simply pride. She made a mental note to inquire about the secretary's habits. Drake was dismissed, his bluster trailing him like a cape. Sylvia Grey entered next, her movements as graceful as a dancer's. She sat crossing her legs and offered Craddock a small, controlled smile. "This is dreadful, Inspector," she said, her voice low and melodic. "Clara and I weren't close, but I'd never wish her harm." Miss Marple studied her, noting the careful choice of words. "Not close, Miss Grey. Yet you worked together daily. What was she like, as a colleague?" Sylvia's smile tightened, her fingers brushing a lock of hair from her face. "She was intense, dedicated, but she could be selfish, always pushing for more screen time. I was in my dressing room, practicing lines when it happened. I heard nothing." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Sylvia's hands, which betrayed a faint tremor. "Practicing alone?" she asked, her tone as gentle as a lullaby. "Yes," Sylvia said too quickly, her gaze sliding away. I prefer solitude when I work. Miss Marple thought of Miss Lavinia, whose charm had masked a ruthless streak. Sylvia's poise was a performance, and Miss Marple sensed a crack in the facade. Craddock asked a few more questions, but Sylvia's answers were polished, deflecting like a mirror. She left, her perfume lingering, a sharp floral note that seemed at odds with her cool demeanour. Tom Harris shuffled in, his eyes downcast, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He sat awkwardly, as if the chair were too small for his lanky frame. "I didn't do anything," he blurted before Craddock could speak. "I was fetching a candelabra from storage. Clara asked for it herself." Miss Marple smiled, her voice warm. "You were fond of her, weren't you, Tom?" "She must have been kind to you." His face reddened, and he nodded. "She was. Always said thank you, not like some. I'd never hurt her." His voice cracked, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. Miss Marple thought of Tommy Pierce again, whose devotion had blinded him to reason. "You were busy that night," she said. "Did you see anyone near the set?" Tom shook his head, but his fingers twisted the hem of his jacket. "Number it was dark. I just did my job." His nervousness was palpable, but was it guilt or fear of authority? Miss Marple filed the question away. Evelyn Marsh was the last, her entrance hesitant, her eyes darting between Craddock and Miss Marple. She clutched the photograph of Clara, her knuckles white. "I loved her," she said, her voice trembling. "She was everything to me. I'd never hurt her." Miss Marple leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "You admired her greatly, Miss Marsh. How did you come to be on the set?" Evelyn's face lit up, then dimmed. "I won a contest. A magazine ran it. Meet Clara Vane, be an extra. I wrote her letters, sent her gifts. She was my inspiration." Her voice faltered. "But lately she didn't answer. Too busy, I suppose?" Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Mrs. Green's fixation. "You were here all night, Miss Marsh?" Evelyn hesitated. "I was outside looking at the stars. I liked to be near her, even if she didn't notice." Her alibi was thin, her devotion intense. Miss Marple wondered if rejection had turned that devotion sour. The interviews concluded, Craddock escorted Miss Marple back to the canteen where the suspects had dispersed. "What do you make of them?" he asked, his voice low. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "They are all hiding something, Inspector. Mr. Drake's temper is a mask, but for what? Miss Grey's ambition is a quiet fire, burning beneath her charm. Young Tom's devotion may blind him, and Miss Marsh's adoration has a desperate edge. We must watch them closely." Craddock sighed. "I'll check their alibis, but it's like chasing shadows." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes gleaming. "Shadows, Inspector, are cast by something solid. We shall find it." She returned to her hotel that evening, her mind weaving the threads of what she had seen. The suspects were players in a drama, each with a role to play, but one had stepped beyond the script. As she knitted by the fire, she thought of St. Mary Mead, where envy and passion hid behind polite smiles. Here, in the glare of the studio lights, those same passions had turned deadly. The game, she knew, had only begun. Chapter 3. The Director's Temper. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Pinewood Studios, casting a pallid light across the sprawling lot. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the chill, walked beside Inspector Craddock toward the director's office, her small valise swinging lightly in her hand. The studio was a hive of subdued activity, the crew's usual bustle tempered by the shadow of Clara Vane's death. Whispers followed Miss Marple as she passed, her unassuming figure drawing curious glances from electricians and script girls alike. To them she was merely an elderly visitor, perhaps a relative of some minor player. But her sharp eyes missed nothing. The nervous fidget of a grip, the hushed argument between two cameramen, the way the air seemed to thicken with unspoken fears. Craddock, his face drawn from a sleepless night, gestured toward a squat building at the edge of the lot. "Drake's office," he said. "He's expecting us, though he's not happy about it. Keeps insisting he's too busy to be bothered." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Busy men, Inspector, often make time for their own defence." She recalled Mr. Hodge, a St. Mary Mead butcher whose bluster had hidden a penchant for pilfering. Men like Lionel Drake, she suspected, used their tempers as a curtain, concealing what lay behind. The office was a chaos of creative excess. Scripts teetered in uneven stacks on a cluttered desk. Cigarette butts overflowed an ashtray shaped like a clapperboard, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey sat beside a typewriter, its keys stained with ink. The walls were plastered with posters of Drake's past films, gaudy melodramas and brooding thrillers, their titles screaming in bold letters. Lionel Drake himself stood by a window, his broad frame silhouetted against the grey sky, barking into a telephone. "I don't care if the lighting's off. Fix it, or you're out." He slammed the receiver down, his florid face reddening further as he noticed his visitors. "Inspector," he growled, barely acknowledging Miss Marple, "this is a waste of time. I've got a film to salvage, and you're hounding me like I'm some common thug." Craddock remained unruffled, his notebook already open. "We're hounding everyone, Mr. Drake. Routine, you understand. Miss Marple here is assisting me. She has a knack for details." Drake's eyes flicked to Miss Marple, taking in her sensible hat and the knitting bag slung over her arm. He snorted, clearly dismissing her as irrelevant. "Details? I've got 1,000 details to manage. Clara's death is a tragedy, but it's not my doing." Miss Marple settled into a rickety chair, her needles emerging from her bag with a soft clink. "Of course, Mr. Drake," she said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "Directing must be terribly demanding. So many people to manage, so many egos. Clara Vane, I hear, was quite particular." Drake's jaw tightened, and he sank into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Particular? She was a bloody nightmare. Always rewriting her lines, demanding close-ups, arguing about costumes. Thought she was Cecil B. DeMille. But I didn't kill her. I was here, working when it happened. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to Drake's agitation. "Working alone, you said? On what, if I may ask?" He gestured at the desk, where a script lay open, its pages scrawled with red ink. Rewriting her scenes, what else? She wanted more depth for Lady Eleanor, kept saying the dialogue was flat. I was up till dawn, trying to keep her happy. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Till dawn, Mr. Drake? A long night. Did anyone see you here?" Drake hesitated, his fingers drumming on the desk. "My secretary, Margaret, popped in around 10. After that, no. It was quiet. Everyone else had gone home." Craddock scribbled a note. "We'll speak to Margaret. Anyone else have access to this office?" Drake shrugged, his eyes narrowing. "The door's never locked. People come and go, assistants, writers, whoever. But I was alone, I swear." Miss Marple's needles paused just for a moment. She thought of Mr. Clements, the St. Mary Mead grocer, whose loud complaints about his suppliers had masked his own pilfering from the till. Drake's temper, she suspected, was a performance, but for whom? "You must have been frustrated, Mr. Drake," she said softly. "A star like Clara, challenging your vision. It would try any man's patience." Drake's face darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice low. "Frustrated? I was livid. She was holding up production, costing thousands. But I'm a professional. I don't strangle my leading ladies, no matter how much they deserve it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Of course, a professional." She recalled a village amateur dramatic society, where a director's rage at a wayward actress had led to a sabotaged prop, not murder. But the seed was the same. Pride, wounded, could fester into something dangerous. Craddock pressed on, asking about Drake's movements, the crew's schedules, the layout of the set. Drake answered brusquely, his impatience growing, but Miss Marple listened beyond his words, noting the way his eyes darted to the script, the way his fingers clenched when Clara's name was mentioned. As they rose to leave, she glanced at the desk, her gaze lingering on a small, overlooked detail. A cigarette stub, its brand different from those in the ashtray, tucked beneath a pile of papers. Outside, Craddock exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "He's a hothead, but is he a killer? His alibi's shaky, and that temper could have snapped." Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her eyes scanning the lot. "A temper, Inspector, is like a storm, loud, but often fleeting. We must ask ourselves what lies beneath it. That cigarette, for instance, not his usual brand. Perhaps someone visited him that night, someone he hasn't mentioned." Craddock's brow furrowed. "You think he's hiding a visitor?" "I think, Inspector, that people like Mr. Drake are rarely as alone as they claim." She thought of Mrs. Bantry's gardener, who had sworn he worked alone in the greenhouse, only for a neighbour to recall seeing a shadow at the window. "Let us speak to this Margaret. Secretaries, I find, see more than they're told to." Margaret, a thin woman with nervous hands and a pince-nez, was found in a cubicle near Drake's office, typing furiously. She confirmed Drake's story. She had brought him coffee at 10, found him hunched over his script, and left soon after. "He was in a foul mood," she admitted, her voice low. "Miss Vane had been at him all day about her lines, but he was still there when I left. I heard him typing as I locked up." Miss Marple smiled encouragingly. "And the door, Miss Margaret? Was it locked when you returned in the morning?" Margaret hesitated, her fingers twisting a pencil. "I suppose it was. I don't recall unlocking it. But I was tired. I might have forgotten." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm as they walked away. "A door that may or may not have been locked," she murmured, "and a cigarette that doesn't belong. Mr. Drake's temper is clear, but his solitude is less so." Craddock glanced at her, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You see things I miss, Miss Marple. What next?" She paused by a soundstage, where a crew was dismantling a set, their hammers echoing like a heartbeat. "Let us walk the set again, Inspector." The scene of a crime is like a village gossip. It tells you more if you listen carefully. They returned to stage 3, the Regency drawing room now bathed in harsh electric light. The chalk outline was gone, but the carpet bore a faint indentation where Clara had fallen. Miss Marple circled the set, her eyes tracing the paths the suspects might have taken. The chair where the scarf had lain was pushed against a wall, its velvet cushion slightly askew. She knelt, her fingers brushing the fabric, and noticed a tiny snag in the upholstery, a thread caught perhaps by a hurried hand. "Inspector," she said, pointing, "this chair. It was moved, I think, after Clara's death. The scuff on the floor suggests it was dragged." Craddock crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing. "You're right. The crew swore they didn't touch anything. So who moved it?" Miss Marple straightened, her mind racing. Someone who needed to cover a trace, perhaps, or someone who wanted the scarf to be found. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead burglary, where a misplaced rug had betrayed a thief's haste. Details, she knew, were the threads that unravelled lies. As they left the set, a young grip approached, his cap pulled low. "Inspector, sir," he said, glancing nervously at Miss Marple. "I heard you asking about Mr. Drake. I saw something that night. Didn't think it mattered till now." Craddock's pen was ready. "Go on." The grip swallowed. "I was leaving late, around 11. Saw a light in Drake's office window. 2 shadows moving. Looked like he was arguing with someone." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Did you see who it was?" "No, ma'am, too dark. But it wasn't Miss Vane. The shadow was kaikosh smaller." Craddock thanked the grip, who scurried off. "A second person," he said, his voice tight. "Drake lied about being alone." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked back to the lot. "Lies, Inspector, are like weeds. Pull one, and you find others tangled beneath. Mr. Drake's temper may have sparked an argument, but with whom, and why hide it?" She thought of the cigarette, the moved chair, the unlocked door. Drake's temper was aflame, but flames needed fuel. Someone had been with him that night, someone who might hold the key to Clara's death. As they reached her hotel, Miss Marple paused, her gaze distant. "Tomorrow, Inspector, we must learn more about this visitor, and perhaps," she added, her voice soft, "about what Clara Vane did to make someone so very angry." Chapter 4. The Co-Star's Ambition. The afternoon light filtered through the grimy windows of Pinewood Studios, casting long shadows across the lot, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Sylvia Grey's dressing room. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and paint, a reminder of the ceaseless work of creation that continued despite the tragedy of Clara Vane's death. Miss Marple's sensible shoes clicked softly on the concrete path, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, its contents a quiet reassurance of normalcy amidst the chaos. Inspector Craddock walked beside her, his brow furrowed, his notebook a constant companion. Their visit to Lionel Drake had left them with questions. A cigarette stub, a shadow in the night, a temper that roared like a furnace. But Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to Sylvia Grey, the poised co-star whose beauty masked a hunger she had glimpsed in the canteen. Sylvia's dressing room was a stark contrast to Drake's chaotic office. It was a small, meticulously arranged space, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected Sylvia's flawless features from every angle. A vanity table held an array of cosmetics, lipsticks in crimson and coral, powders in delicate tins. A silver hairbrush engraved with her initials. A vase of white roses, their petals just beginning to wilt, stood on a side table, their scent mingling with the faint tang of perfume. Sylvia sat before the vanity, brushing her golden hair with slow, deliberate strokes, her green dress catching the light like a polished emerald. She rose as they entered, her smile as carefully crafted as a stage direction. "Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "I hope I can be of help. This whole affair is simply dreadful." Miss Marple returned the smile, her eyes bright and observant behind her spectacles. "Dreadful indeed, Miss Grey. We won't take much of your time. I'm sure you're eager to return to your work." Sylvia gestured to a pair of cushioned chairs, her movements graceful. "Please, sit. I'm at your disposal." Her tone was courteous, but there was a guardedness in her eyes, a flicker of wariness that Miss Marple noted with interest. Craddock opened his notebook, his pen poised. "Miss Grey, let's go over your movements the night Clara Vane was killed. You said you were in your dressing room, practicing lines?" Sylvia nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "Yes, Inspector. I was preparing for a scene we were to shoot the next day. Clara's scenes were demanding, and I needed to be ready to match her." Her lips curved slightly, a hint of bitterness beneath the polish. Miss Marple's needles emerged from her bag, the soft click of their rhythm filling the silence. "You must have worked closely with Miss Vane," she said, her voice gentle. "What was she like, as an actress?" Sylvia's smile tightened, her fingers brushing the edge of her dress. "Clara was talented, no question. She had a presence, a way of drawing every eye. But she was difficult. She wanted everything her way, the best lines, the best angles. It made things tense." Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Miss Lavinia Grey, Sylvia's distant cousin, whose charm had once concealed a ruthless streak in St. Mary Mead. "Tense," she repeated softly. "That must have been trying, Miss Grey, especially for someone with your own considerable gifts." Sylvia's eyes flickered, a spark of pride quickly masked. "I manage, Miss Marple. The stage teaches you to adapt, but yes, Clara could be exhausting." Craddock leaned forward. "You were alone in here, you said. No one came by, no one saw you." Sylvia's gaze held steady, but her fingers tightened in her lap. "No one. I prefer solitude when I rehearse. It helps me focus." Miss Marple's needles paused just for a moment. She recalled a village actress, Miss Emily Barton, who had sabotaged a rival's costume out of envy, her sweet demeanour hiding a fierce ambition. Sylvia's composure was flawless, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. "This is a lovely room," Miss Marple said, her eyes sweeping the space. "So private, and yet so close to the set where Miss Vane was found. You must hear all sorts of comings and goings." Sylvia's smile faltered, a crack in her facade. "It's a busy studio. People are always rushing about. I don't pay much attention." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene. Not even a scream, perhaps? Or a door slamming? She thought of Mrs. Price, whose deafness to a neighbour's cries had been a convenient fiction. Sylvia shook her head too quickly. "Nothing. I was absorbed in my lines." Her voice was firm, but her eyes darted to the mirrors, as if seeking her own reflection for reassurance. Craddock made a note. "We'll need to confirm the timeline. Anyone who might have passed by your door that night." Sylvia hesitated, her fingers brushing the hairbrush. "I suppose Tom Harris was around. He's always fetching things for Clara, but I didn't see him." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the hairbrush, its silver gleaming under the light. A small detail caught her attention. A single dark hair, coiled on the vanity, its colour stark against Sylvia's golden locks. Clara Vane, she recalled, had dark hair. "You and Miss Vane shared this space at times, I imagine," she asked, her tone casual. Sylvia's hand froze, then moved to adjust a lipstick. Occasionally. She liked to borrow my mirror. Said the light was better here. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A shared space meant shared opportunities. Perhaps for resentment, perhaps for access to Clara's scarf. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's sewing circle, where a borrowed needle had sparked a feud that ended in broken friendships. Small intimacies, she knew, could breed great animosities. Craddock stood, signalling the end of the interview. "Thank you, Miss Grey. We'll be in touch if we need more." Sylvia rose, her composure restored. "Of course, Inspector. I want this solved as much as anyone." Her smile was perfect, but Miss Marple saw the strain in her eyes, like a performer dreading a missed cue. As they left the dressing room, Craddock glanced at Miss Marple. "She's smooth, I'll give her that. But that pause when you asked about noises, did you catch it?" Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked down the corridor. "Oh yes, Inspector. Miss Grey is a fine actress, but even the best falter when the script is unwritten. That hair on her vanity, dark like Clara's, it suggests more than a casual visit." Craddock's eyes widened. "You think Clara was here that night?" "I think, Inspector, that Miss Grey's solitude is as questionable as Mr. Drake's. Let us see what the crew knows about her habits." They sought out a makeup artist, a wiry woman named Doris with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes. She was powdering an extra's face in a corner of the lot, her hands deft despite her grumbling. "Sylvia Grey," Doris said, snorting, "thinks she's Garbo, always, practicing in that dressing room, door shut tight. But I saw her slip out around 11, heading toward the set. Looked like she was in a huff." Miss Marple's needles slowed. "In a huff, Doris?" "Did she say anything?" Doris shrugged, brushing powder from her hands. "Not to me. But she and Clara had a row earlier that day. Something about screen time. Sylvia was spitting mad, said Clara was stealing her chance to shine." Craddock scribbled furiously. "Did you see her return?" Doris shook her head. "No, but I left soon after. Studio was quiet by then." Miss Marple thanked her, her mind weaving a new thread into the tapestry. Sylvia's ambition was no secret, but an argument with Clara, followed by a late-night visit to the set, was a pattern. She thought of Miss Lavinia, whose jealousy had driven her to spread vicious gossip about a rival. Sylvia's stakes were higher. A starring role, a career in the balance. Ambition, Miss Marple knew, could turn a heart to stone. They returned to the set, where the crew was adjusting lights for a new scene. The Regency drawing room looked almost alive under the glare, its opulence a mocking contrast to the tragedy it had hosted. Miss Marple paused by Clara's chair, her eyes tracing the snag in the upholstery she had noticed before. She knelt, her fingers brushing the fabric, and found another detail. A tiny bead, green and shimmering, caught in the seam. It matched the hue of Sylvia's dress. "Inspector," she said, holding up the bead, "this was not here yesterday. Someone has been careless." Craddock examined it, his expression grim. Sylvia's dress could have fallen when she moved the chair. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes distant, or when she picked up the scarf. A moment's impulse, perhaps fueled by a day's resentment. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead garden party, where a dropped brooch had betrayed a thief's presence. Small things, she knew, could undo great plans. As they left the set, Craddock's voice was low. "Sylvia's looking shakier by the minute. That bead, her late-night walk, the argument, motive, and opportunity. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Indeed, Inspector, but we must be careful. Ambition is a powerful motive, but so is pride, or love, or betrayal. Miss Grey is not alone in her secrets. They parted ways at the studio gate. Craddock to pursue alibis, Miss Marple to her hotel. As she sat by the fire that evening, her knitting in her lap, she thought of Sylvia's poised exterior and the cracks beneath. The dark hair, the green bead, the hurried exit from the dressing room, they were pieces of a puzzle, but not yet the whole picture. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen ambition drive good women to cruelty, but murder required a colder heart. Was Sylvia's cold enough? Miss Marple's needles clicked on, weaving wool and suspicion into a pattern only she could see. Chapter 5. The Assistant's Devotion. The late afternoon at Pinewood Studios carried a chill that seeped through the cracks of the sprawling lot, where the clamour of hammers and shouted directions had dwindled to a murmur. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat buttoned tightly, walked with a measured step toward the props department, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side. Inspector Craddock accompanied her, his face etched with the strain of a case that seemed to twist further with each new thread. The revelations about Sylvia Grey, the dark hair, the green bead, the late-night argument had sharpened their focus. But Miss Marple's mind now turned to Tom Harris, the young assistant whose nervous glances and boyish devotion to Clara Vane suggested depths yet unexplored. The props department was a cavernous warehouse, its shelves groaning under the weight of candelabras, velvet drapes and tarnished swords, all relics of films past and present. The air smelled of dust and linseed oil, and the dim light cast long shadows across the cluttered aisles. Tom Harris was there, sorting a pile of brass fittings, his lanky frame hunched as if to make himself smaller. His jacket, too large for his narrow shoulders, hung like a borrowed costume, and his brown hair fell into eyes that darted toward the door as Miss Marple and Craddock approached. "Tom," Craddock said, his tone firm but not unkind, "we need a word. Somewhere quiet, if you please." Tom's hands fumbled, dropping a brass knob that clattered to the floor. Yes, sir," he stammered, his face paling. "There's a storeroom in the back. It's private." They followed him through the maze of props to a small windowless room lit by a single bulb. Crates of costume jewellery and chipped porcelain lined the walls, and a rickety table held a thermos of tea and a dog-eared script. Tom sat, his fingers twisting the hem of his jacket, his eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple settled opposite him, her needles emerging with their familiar click, the pale pink wool a soft contrast to the stark surroundings. She smiled, her expression warm, like an aunt soothing a nervous child. "No need to be afraid, Tom," she said gently. "We only want the truth. You were fond of Miss Vane, weren't you?" Tom's face flushed, a tide of red creeping up his neck. "She was kind," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always said thank you, even for little things like fetching her tea. Not everyone does that." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. She thought of young Tommy Pierce from St. Mary Mead, whose devotion to a schoolteacher had led him to steal flowers from a neighbour's garden, hoping to win her favour. Devotion, she knew, could blind as easily as it inspired. "You must have spent a great deal of time with her," she said, running errands, fetching props. You said you were getting a candelabra the night she died." Tom nodded, his fingers tightening on the jacket. "Yes, ma'am. She wanted it. For a scene. Said it had to be just right. Silver, not brass. I was in the storage room, digging through crates. Took ages." Craddock opened his notebook, his pen poised. "What time was this, Tom? And did you see anyone near the set when you left?" Tom's eyes flicked up, then away. "Around midnight, I think. I didn't see anyone. The studio was quiet, just the night watchman somewhere. I went straight to storage and stayed there till I found it." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a rhythm that seemed to steady the room. "Midnight is late for such a task, Tom," she said. "Did Miss Vane often send you on errands at such hours?" Tom swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sometimes. She liked things done proper. Said I was reliable." His voice held a note of pride, but his hands betrayed him, twisting the fabric until it frayed. Miss Marple's mind drifted to a St. Mary Mead lad, young Billy, who had run errands for the vicar's wife, his adoration making him blind to her manipulations. "Reliable," she repeated softly. "That's a fine quality, Tom. But it must have been tiring, always at her beck and call. Did it ever frustrate you?" Tom's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "No, I'd never. I mean, I liked helping her. She was special." His voice cracked, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. Craddock leaned forward, his tone sharper. "You were seen near her dressing room earlier that day, Tom. Lingering, some said. Care to explain?" Tom's face reddened further, and he hunched lower. "I was just waiting. She asked me to check on a costume. I wasn't spying or nothing." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze gentle but piercing. "Waiting can feel like a heavy task, Tom, when someone doesn't notice your efforts. Did Miss Vane ever disappoint you?" Tom's hands stilled, and for a moment silence hung in the room. "She was busy," he said finally, his voice low. "Didn't always have time to talk, but I didn't mind. I just wanted to help." Miss Marple nodded, her mind sifting through his words. Devotion could be a pure flame, but it could also smoulder into resentment if unreturned. She thought of the script on the table, its pages worn from handling. "That's Miss Vane's script, isn't it?" she asked, pointing. Tom glanced at it, startled. "Yes, ma'am. She gave it to me to mark her lines. I was going to return it, but—" His voice trailed off, and he looked down, his fingers resuming their nervous dance. Craddock made a note. "We'll need to see that script, Tom, and we'll check the storage room. Anyone see you there?" Tom shook his head. "It was late. Just me and the props." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the script, noting a faint smudge on the cover. A trace of grease paint, perhaps, or something else. "You're very thorough, Tom," she said. "Did you handle Miss Vane's scarf at all? The one she wore with her initials?" Tom's eyes widened, and he shook his head vehemently. "No, ma'am. I never touched it. She left it on her chair, I think. I didn't go near it." Miss Marple smiled, her expression unchanged. "Of course, just a thought." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead boy, young Jimmy, who had sworn he hadn't touched a stolen pie, only for crumbs on his shirt to betray him. Small details, she knew, could unravel even the most earnest denials. They left Tom in the storeroom, his head bowed, and made their way to the storage area he had described. It was a dimly lit corner of the warehouse, filled with crates of candelabras, lamps and chandeliers. Craddock examined the space, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. "He could have been here," he said, "but there's no way to prove it. No one to confirm his story." Miss Marple knelt, her knees protesting, to inspect a crate. A faint mark caught her eye. A smudge of silver polish on the wood, fresh and glistening. "He was here, Inspector," she said, pointing. "This polish is recent." But whether he stayed as long as he claims is another matter. Craddock frowned, his flashlight lingering on the smudge. "You think he's lying?" "I think, Inspector, that young men like Tom wear their hearts openly, but their truths are often tangled. He loved Clara, that much is clear, but love can make one blind, or bold." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead romance, where a boy's devotion had led to a reckless act of vandalism, all to prove his loyalty. Tom's devotion was evident, but was it enough to drive him to murder? As they returned to the lot, they encountered a script girl, a nervous young woman named Betty, who was clutching a clipboard. She hesitated, then approached Craddock. "Sir, I heard you were asking about Tom. I saw him that night, near the set before midnight. He was carrying a candelabra, like he said, but he looked upset." Kept glancing at Clara's chair. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Upset, Betty? How so?" Betty bit her lip. "His face was all red, like he'd been crying, or angry. I didn't ask. He's shy, you know, but he was near that scarf." Craddock thanked her, and she hurried off, her clipboard clutched like a shield. He turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "That puts Tom at the scene, close to the murder weapon, and upset no less." Miss Marple's needles clicked as they walked toward her hotel. "Indeed, Inspector, but upset is not the same as guilty. Tom's devotion may have made him a witness, not a killer. We must learn what upset him, and whether it was Clara herself." At her hotel, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting in her lap, the pink shawl growing under her deft fingers. She thought of Tom's flushed face, his trembling hands, the smudge of polish in the storage room. Devotion, she knew, could be a powerful force, but it was fragile, easily bruised by rejection or betrayal. Had Clara's indifference pushed Tom to a desperate act, or had he seen something that night, something he was too afraid to reveal? The script, the smudge, the scarf, they were clues, but the heart of the puzzle lay in the human soul, and Miss Marple knew she was only beginning to glimpse its shape. Chapter 6. The Fan's Obsession. The evening shadows lengthened across Pinewood Studios, cloaking the lot in a sombre hush, as Miss Jane Marple made her way toward a quiet corner near the sound stages. The air was cool, tinged with the faint metallic tang of machinery and the distant hum of a generator. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, the soft clink of her needles a steady companion to her thoughts. Inspector Craddock walked beside her, his notebook tucked under his arm, his face a mask of quiet frustration. The threads of the case, Lionel Drake's temper, Sylvia Gray's ambition, Tom Harris's devotion, had woven a complex tapestry. But now their attention turned to Evelyn Marsh, the fan whose fervent adoration of Clara Vane seemed both a motive and a mystery. They had arranged to meet Evelyn near the studio's perimeter, where a small bench overlooked a patch of scrubby grass and a sky bruised with twilight. Evelyn was already there, her slight figure hunched in a plain brown coat, her hands clutching the worn photograph of Clara Vane as if it were a talisman. Her mousy hair was pinned loosely, strands escaping to frame a face that was unremarkable save for the intensity of her eyes that held a feverish gleam, like those of a pilgrim at a shrine. As Miss Marple and Craddock approached, Evelyn started, her fingers tightening on the photograph. "Miss Marsh," Craddock said, his tone measured, "thank you for meeting us. We have a few more questions about the night Miss Vane died." Evelyn's gaze darted between them, settling briefly on Miss Marple's kindly face before dropping to the ground. "I've told you everything," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't hurt her. I couldn't. She was everything." Miss Marple settled onto the bench beside her, her movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a skittish animal. Her needles emerged, the pale pink wool catching the fading light. "Of course, my dear," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "No one doubts your affection for Miss Vane. It must have been a great joy to meet her, to be so close after admiring her from afar." Evelyn's eyes softened, a flicker of pride breaking through her unease. "It was a dream," she said, her voice warming. "I wrote to her for years, letters, poems, little gifts. A locket once, with my picture, so she'd know me. When I won the contest to be an extra, I thought she'd see me at last." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. She thought of Mrs. Green from St. Mary Mead, whose devotion to the vicar had bordered on worship, her every act a plea for notice. "And did she see you, Miss Marsh?" she asked, gently. "Did she speak to you, here on the set?" Evelyn's face clouded, her fingers crumpling the edge of the photograph. "Not much," she admitted. "She was busy, always rushing to rehearsals or fittings. I tried to talk to her, to tell her what her films meant to me, but she smiled and moved on, said she had no time." Miss Marple's eyes were kind, but they missed nothing, the tremor in Evelyn's voice, the way her gaze lingered on the photograph. "That must have been disappointing," she said, "to come so far, to win such a prize, and yet feel unseen." Evelyn's lips quivered, and she looked away, her eyes glistening. "I didn't mind. I just wanted to be near her, to watch her work. She was a goddess, you know. Perfect." Craddock opened his notebook, his pen scratching faintly. "Miss Marsh, you said you were outside the studio that night, stargazing. Can anyone confirm that?" Evelyn shook her head, her hands twisting the photograph. "Number I was alone. The watchman passed by earlier, but I stayed out till late. I like the stars. They make me feel closer to her." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind sifting through Evelyn's words. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead spinster, Miss Pollitt, whose obsession with a local poet had led to late-night vigils outside his cottage, her devotion teetering on the edge of madness. "Stargazing is a lonely pastime," she said softly. "Did you see anything unusual that night? Anyone near the set?" Evelyn hesitated, her fingers stilling. I saw lights in the soundstage, flickering. Thought it was the crew, maybe. But I didn't go in. I stayed outside." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Lights? At what time?" Evelyn bit her lip, her gaze dropping. "Maybe 11, or a bit later. I wasn't keeping track." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her thoughts racing. Evelyn's alibi was as fragile as gossamer. Her presence near the set a troubling coincidence. She thought of the scarf, Clara's own, left so conveniently on the chair. "Miss Vane's scarf," she said, her tone casual. "You must have seen it on the set, with her initials so beautifully embroidered. Did you ever touch it, perhaps to feel closer to her?" Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "No, I'd never. Her things were sacred. I only looked. I wouldn't take anything." Her voice was shrill, her hands trembling so violently that the photograph slipped to the bench. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Of course, my dear. I only wondered. Fans often cherish such mementos." She picked up the photograph, smoothing its creased edges, and noticed a faint mark on the back. A smudge of ink, fresh and dark. "This is a lovely picture," she said, handing it back. "You've kept it close." Evelyn clutched it to her chest, her eyes glistening. "It's all I have left of her," she whispered. Craddock made a note, his expression sceptical. "We'll need to check the watchman's rounds, Miss Marsh. If you remember anything else, lights, voices, anything, let us know." Evelyn nodded, her face pale, and they left her on the bench, her figure small against the vastness of the studio lot. As they walked away, Craddock glanced at Miss Marple. "She's a strange one. That obsession, it's almost unhinged, and her alibi's as thin as paper." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes distant. "Obsession, Inspector, is like a river. It can nourish or drown. Miss Marsh's devotion is real, but her disappointment is too. That ink on the photograph, it's fresh, not faded. She may have been writing something recently, perhaps a letter she never sent." Craddock frowned, his steps slowing. "You think she was on the set? Close enough to see something, or do something?" "I think, Inspector, that Miss Marsh was closer to Clara than she admits. Whether as a witness or something more, we must find out." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, Mrs. Finch, whose letters to a distant cousin had hidden a deeper resentment. Words, Miss Marple knew, could reveal as much as actions. They sought out the night watchman, a grizzled man named George with a limp and a penchant for strong tea. He was in the guardhouse, warming his hands over a small heater. "Miss Marsh?" he said, scratching his chin. I saw her that night, hanging about near the gate. Must have been 10 or so. Looked like she was waiting for someone, but she didn't say nothing. Just stood there, staring at the stars." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Waiting, George? Or perhaps watching?" George shrugged, his eyes narrowing. "Could be. She's a queer one, always muttering about Miss Vane. Saw her slip toward the soundstage later, maybe 11. Didn't think much of it. Extras come and go." Craddock's pen moved swiftly. "Did you see her go inside?" George shook his head. "Didn't follow her. Had my rounds to do, but she was out there longer than most." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind weaving the new thread into the pattern. Evelyn's presence near the set, her vague alibi, the ink on the photograph, they were fragments of a story. But whose? She thought of the lights Evelyn had mentioned, flickering in the soundstage. Had she seen more than she claimed, or was her devotion a mask for something darker? They returned to the set, now dark and silent, the Regency drawing room a ghostly silhouette under the dim safety lights. Miss Marple paused by Clara's chair, her eyes tracing the familiar snag in the upholstery, the faint scuff on the floor. She knelt, her fingers brushing the carpet, and found a new detail. A tiny scrap of paper, caught in the fibres. It was torn, no larger than a postage stamp, but the ink was unmistakable, matching the smudge on Evelyn's photograph. "Inspector," she said, holding it up, "this was not here before." A note, perhaps, dropped in. "Haste." Craddock examined it, his brow furrowing. Could be hers, or someone else's. We'll have it analysed." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked back to the lot. Evelyn's obsession brought her close to Clara, Inspector. Too close, perhaps. But whether she acted on it, or merely witnessed something, we must learn what she wrote, and to whom. At her hotel that night, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm in her hands. The pink shawl grew, its delicate pattern a mirror to her thoughts. Evelyn's fervent eyes, her trembling hands, the ink-stained photograph, they were clues to a heart consumed by adoration. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had seen obsession drive quiet souls to desperate acts. But murder required a spark of rage or despair. Had Evelyn's dream of Clara's notice shattered into something deadly? Or was she a bystander, caught in the web of another's crime? The scrap of paper, the flickering lights, the scarf, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Miss Marple felt the pattern beginning to take shape, though its final form remained just out of reach. Chapter 7. The Silk Scarf. The morning air at Pinewood Studios was sharp with the promise of rain, the sky a sullen grey that mirrored the mood of the lot. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat dusted with a faint mist, walked with Inspector Craddock toward the evidence room, her knitting bag a quiet weight at her side. The studio's frenetic energy had dulled, the crew moving with a subdued wariness, as if Clara Vane's death had cast a shadow that lingered in every corner. The threads of the case, Lionel Drake's temper, Sylvia Grey's ambition, Tom Harris's devotion, Evelyn Marsh's obsession, had woven a complex web, but Miss Marple's thoughts now turned to the murder weapon itself. The silk scarf, monogrammed with Clara's initials, that had ended her life. The evidence room was a small, sterile space tucked behind the studio's security office, its walls lined with metal cabinets and a single table bearing a locked box. A young constable, his uniform crisp, stood guard, his eyes flicking nervously to Craddock as they entered. "Morning, sir," he said, unlocking the box with a key from his belt. "The scarf's here, as you requested." Craddock nodded, his face etched with the strain of a case that refused to unravel. "Thank you, Jenkins. Miss Marple, you wanted to see it?" Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her expression serene, but her eyes alight with curiosity. "Indeed, Inspector, a murder weapon is often more than it seems. It tells a story, if one listens." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead incident, where a kitchen knife, chosen in haste, had revealed a husband's long-simmering rage. The scarf, she suspected, held its own secrets. The constable lifted the scarf from the box, laying it on the table with gloved hands. It was a delicate thing. Pale blue silk embroidered with the initials CV in silver thread, its edges frayed slightly from use. The fabric was creased where it had been knotted, a grim reminder of its role in Clara's death. Miss Marple leaned closer, her needles still in her bag, her fingers itching to touch the silk but restrained by protocol. She noted the faint scent clinging to it, not perfume, but something sharper, like talcum powder or stage makeup. "A personal item," she said softly, her voice barely disturbing the room's stillness. "Chosen deliberately, I think. Not a spur-of-the-moment act, but one with intent." Craddock frowned, his notebook open. It was Clara's, left on her chair. Anyone on the set could have grabbed it. But why use her own scarf? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "That, Inspector, is the question. A scarf is intimate, close to the skin. To use it suggests familiarity, or a desire to make the act personal." She thought of Mrs. Babcock, a St. Mary Mead widow who had once used her husband's tie to strangle a rival, the choice laden with meaning. Who had access to this scarf beyond Clara herself? Craddock gestured to the constable, who produced a clipboard with a log. The set was locked after hours, but the crew had keys. Drake, Sylvia, Tom, they all could have been there. Evelyn, too, as an extra. The watchman's rounds are spotty, so anyone could have slipped in. Miss Marple nodded, her mind tracing the paths of the suspects. She recalled the snag in the chair's upholstery, the green bead from Sylvia's dress, the smudge of polish in Tom's storage room, the ink-stained scrap near Evelyn's bench. Each clue was a thread, but the scarf was the knot that bound them. "Let us visit the set again," she said. "The chair where it was found may tell us more." They crossed the lot to stage 3, the Regency drawing room now stripped of its glamour under the harsh work lights. The chair, plush and velvet, stood where Clara had left it, its cushions still askew. Miss Marple knelt, her knees protesting, and examined the fabric closely. A faint powder residue, almost invisible, dusted the armrest. Talcum, she thought, matching the scent on the scarf. She straightened, her eyes scanning the room for other traces. "Inspector," she said, pointing to the residue. "This powder. It's on the scarf as well. Not perfume, but something used in makeup, perhaps. Did Clara use talcum on set?" Craddock called over a makeup artist, Doris, who had spoken of Sylvia's temper. Doris wiped her hands on her apron, her sharp eyes narrowing. Talcum? Clara used it sometimes to set her powder. Kept a tin in her dressing room. But it was everywhere. Half the crew used it to keep cool under the lights. Miss Marple's needles emerged, their click a steady rhythm as she processed this. "Everywhere," she murmured. "Yet on the scarf and the chair it's fresh. Someone handled both, and recently." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead, seamstress, whose spilled flour had betrayed her presence at a burglary. Small traces, she knew, could speak volumes. Craddock made a note. "We'll check the dressing rooms for talcum tins. Sylvia shared Clara's space at times. Could be hers." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the chair. Or Tom's, fetching props. Or Evelyn's, lingering near her idol. Even Drake, storming about the set. The scarf was a weapon of opportunity, but its choice was not random. She paused, her mind drifting to a village scandal, where a stolen shawl had symbolized a deeper betrayal. We must learn who touched it last, and why they chose it. They moved to Clara's dressing room, a smaller mirror of Sylvia's, cluttered with costumes and scripts. A tin of talcum sat on the vanity, its lid slightly ajar, a faint dusting of powder on the table. Miss Marple examined it, noting a smudge on the tin's edge. A fingerprint, perhaps, or a careless brush of a sleeve. "This should be tested, Inspector," she said. "It may tell us who was here." Craddock nodded, signalling the constable to bag the tin. "I'll have forensics look at it, but it's a busy set. Could be anyone's." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts weaving a pattern. "Not anyone, Inspector. Someone with reason to be close to Clara, to know her habits, her possessions. The scarf was hers, left where she sat. Someone saw it, took it, and used it." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead Gardner, whose theft of a neighbour's rake had been a deliberate slight, not a random act. Intention, she knew, was the heart of this crime. They spoke next to a wardrobe assistant, a young woman named Lily, with a quick smile and nervous hands. "The scarf?" Lily said, her brow furrowing. "Clara wore it all the time. Said it was lucky. She'd drape it over her chair between takes. Everyone knew it was hers. Miss Marple tilted her head. "Everyone, Lily. Did you see anyone near it that night?" Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting a button on her blouse. I saw Tom near the chair, earlier in the evening. He was tidying up, moving things around, and Sylvia, she was there too after a rehearsal, looking cross, said something about Clara hogging the spotlight. Craddock's pen moved swiftly. Anyone else? Evelyn Marsh, perhaps. Lily nodded slowly. She was always hanging about, watching Clara. I saw her near the set late, maybe 10. Didn't think much of it. She's an extra, always poking around. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And Mr. Drake? Did he ever handle Clara's things? Lily shrugged. He's not one for props, but he was on set all day shouting. Could have touched anything. As they left the dressing room, Craddock's voice was low. The scarf's the key, isn't it? Everyone had access, but someone chose it deliberately. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked through the lot. Deliberately, Inspector. The scarf was not just convenient, it was a statement, a personal act, born of anger or envy or love turned sour. She thought of Evelyn's obsession, Sylvia's ambition, Tom's devotion, Drake's pride. Each could have reached for that scarf, but only one had knotted it around Clara's neck. At her hotel that evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm in her hands. The pink shawl grew, its delicate lace a mirror to her thoughts. The scarf, with its talcum and silver embroidery, was a silent witness to the killer's heart. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen personal items wielded as weapons, a locket, a letter, a ring, each chosen to wound as much as to destroy. Who, she wondered, had hated Clara enough to use her own scarf against her? The powder, the smudge, the chair, they were clues, but the truth lay in the motive, and Miss Marple felt it drawing closer, like a figure emerging from the mist. Chapter 8. Whispers on the Set. The morning at Pinewood Studios dawned with a drizzle that clung to the air, turning the lot into a maze of puddles and hurried footsteps. Miss Jane Marple, her umbrella tilted against the damp, moved with her usual quiet purpose, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side. Inspector Craddock walked beside her, his coat collar turned up, his notebook damp at the edges. The studio's frenetic energy had settled into a restless hum, the crew casting sidelong glances as they passed, their whispers a soft undercurrent to the clatter of equipment. Clara Vane's death had left a wound in the air, and Miss Marple sensed that the truth lay not just in the suspect's words, but in the unspoken tensions that swirled around them. Their investigation had gathered threads. Lionel Drake's volatile temper, Sylvia Grey's calculated ambition, Tom Harris's fervent devotion, Evelyn Marsh's obsessive adoration, and the silk scarf that bound them all to the crime. The talcum powder, the green bead, the ink-stained scrap. Each clue was a fragment of a larger picture. But Miss Marple knew that the crew, those silent observers of the studio's dramas, held pieces of the puzzle. In St. Mary Mead, she had often found that the butcher, the baker, or the postman saw more than they realized, their gossip weaving truths the guilty could not hide. Here she sought the same. They began in the canteen, where the air smelled of burnt toast and strong coffee, and the crew gathered in knots, their voices low. Miss Marple settled at a corner table, her needles emerging to work the pale pink shawl, their click a soothing counterpoint to the murmurs. Craddock, ever practical, approached a cameraman named Fred, a burly man with a grizzled beard and eyes that missed little. "Fred," Craddock said, his tone easy but firm, "we're piecing together the night Miss Vane died. You were on set late, weren't you? Notice anything unusual?" Fred leaned back, his hands cradling a mug. "Late? I was adjusting lenses till about 10. Clara was still there, rehearsing with Sylvia. Tense, it was. Sylvia looked ready to spit nails. Clara got the best lines again, and Sylvia didn't like it." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Tense, Mr. Fred? Did they argue?" She thought of a saint. Mary Mead's sewing circle, where a sharp word over a pattern had revealed a deeper grudge. Fred nodded, his voice low. "Not loud, mind you. Sylvia's too clever for that. But I heard her mutter something about Clara stealing her light. She stormed off to her dressing room after." Craddock scribbled a note. "Anyone else around? Tom Harris, maybe? Or Evelyn Marsh?" Fred shrugged. Tom was scurrying about, carrying props. Kids always mooning over Clara. Evelyn was there too, hanging back like a shadow. Kept staring at Clara's chair, where that scarf was. Miss Marple's needles resumed, her mind weaving Fred's words into the pattern. Sylvia's resentment, Tom's devotion, Evelyn's fixation, they were threads she had traced before, but Fred's observation added weight. She recalled a village fete, where a bystander's casual remark had unravelled a theft. "Thank you, Fred," she said. "You've a keen eye." Their next stop was the makeup department, where Doris, the sharp-tongued artist, was cleaning brushes with brisk efficiency. Her apron was smudged with powder, and her eyes glinted with the gossip she loved to share. "Doris," Craddock said, "you knew Clara well. Any trouble on set? Arguments? Rivalries?" Doris snorted, her hands never pausing. "Trouble? This place is a nest of vipers. Clara and Drake were at it like cats and dogs. Him shouting about her demands, her insisting on new lines. He nearly threw a script at her once." Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Mr. Drake's temper must have been a trial. Did you see him near Clara's chair that night?" Doris hesitated, her brush slowing. "Not exactly, but he was storming around the set till late, yelling about deadlines. Could have grabbed that scarf easy enough." Miss Marple nodded, thinking of Mr. Clements, the St. Mary Mead grocer, whose rages had hidden a deeper fear of failure. "And Miss Gray?" she asked. "You mentioned her temper before." Doris's eyes narrowed. "Sylvia? She's a cool one, but she was livid with Clara. Said Clara was hogging the role of Lady Eleanor. I saw her near the set after 10, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon." Craddock's pen moved swiftly. "And Tom Harris? Evelyn Marsh?" Doris wiped her hands, her voice dropping. "Tom was always trailing Clara, like a lost puppy. I saw him near her chair that evening, fussing with props. Looked upset, like he'd been scolded. Evelyn? Well, she's a queer one. Kept lurking near the set, muttering to herself. I heard her say something about Clara betraying her fans." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind sifting through the whispers. Each suspect had been near the scarf, each with a reason to resent Clara. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead tea party, where a careless remark had exposed a liar. "Betrayal," she murmured. "A powerful word, Doris. Did Evelyn seem angry?" Doris nodded. "Angry or hurt? Hard to tell with her. She's always clutching that photo of Clara, like it's her lifeline." They thanked Doris and moved to the props department, where a young girl named Peggy was sorting wigs. Her hands trembled slightly as Craddock approached, her eyes darting to Miss Marple's knitting. "Peggy," Craddock said, "you were on set the night Clara died. See anything out of place?" Peggy bit her lip, her voice soft. "I was packing up props around 9. Tom was there, moving Clara's chair. He looked strange, like he was fighting tears. Said Clara had snapped at him about a prop being wrong." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Snapped at him? That must have stung, poor boy. Did you see anyone else near the chair?" Peggy hesitated, then nodded. "Evelyn was skulking nearby, watching Clara rehearse. She had that photo in her hand, kept stroking it. Gave me the creeps." Craddock made a note. "And Sylvia Grey? Drake?" Peggy shrugged. "Sylvia swept through after rehearsal, all huffy, didn't stop long. Drake was in and out, shouting as usual. I left before 10, so I don't know what happened after." As they left the props department, Craddock's voice was low. "Everyone's pointing fingers, but it's the same story. Sylvia's jealous, Tom's lovesick, Evelyn's obsessed, Drake's furious. And they were all near that scarf." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts racing. "Indeed, Inspector, but one detail stands out. Sylvia's role as understudy. If Clara died, she'd take the part of Lady Eleanor. A powerful motive, don't you think?" She recalled a saint, Mary Mead actress, whose envy of a rival's role had led to a sabotage performance, though not murder. Ambition, she knew, could sharpen a heart to a deadly point. They paused by the set, the Regency drawing room, now shrouded in canvas covers, its elegance muted. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on Clara's chair, the talcum residue and green beads still vivid in her mind. She thought of the ink-stained scrap near Evelyn's bench, the smudge of polish in Tom's storage room, the cigarette in Drake's office. Each suspect was tethered to the scene, but Sylvia's gain was immediate, a starring role, a chance to shine. Craddock rubbed his chin. Sylvia's looking stronger for it, but Tom's tears and Evelyn's muttering, they're not clean either, and Drake's temper could have boiled over. Miss Marple nodded, her needles steady. "A tapestry, Inspector, with many threads. But the scarf was the knot, and Sylvia stood to gain the most from Clara's absence. We must watch her closely." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Garden, where a single weed had choked a rose. Sylvia's ambition was such a weed, but was it the only one? At her hotel that evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a rhythm of thought. The whispers of the crew, Sylvia's fury, Tom's tears, Evelyn's betrayal, Drake's rage, were like the gossip of St. Mary Mead, each fragment a clue to the whole. Sylvia's motive burned brightest, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust the obvious. The truth, she sensed, was a shadow moving among the whispers, and she would find it by listening where others did not. Chapter 9. The Rehearsal. The drizzle had given way to a steady rain by mid-morning, cloaking Pinewood Studios in a grey veil that dampened spirits as much as it did the cobblestones of the lot. Miss Jane Marple, her umbrella a shield against the wet, moved with quiet determination toward stage 3, her knitting bag tucked securely under her arm. Inspector Craddock walked beside her, his coat slick with rain, his expression a blend of resolve and weariness. The whispers of the crew had tightened the threads of suspicion around Sylvia Grey's ambition, Tom Harris's devotion, Evelyn Marsh's obsession, and Lionel Drake's temper, but the silk scarf, Clara Vane's own, knotted in death, remained the enigma at the heart of the crime. To unravel it, Miss Marple had proposed a reenactment of the night's events, a stage play of sorts to coax truth from shadow. The idea had come to her as she knitted by her hotel fire the previous evening, the pink shawl growing under her fingers like a map of her thoughts. In St. Mary Mead, she had once orchestrated a village pageant to reveal a thief, the act of recreating a moment exposing lies in posture and glance. Here, she hoped, the suspects' movements on the set would betray what their words concealed. Craddock had agreed, though his scepticism lingered. "It's a long shot," he'd said, "but your long shots have a way of hitting the mark." Stage 3 was a cavernous space, its Regency drawing room set restored to its fatal configuration. Velvet drapes, gilt mirrors, and the plush chair where Clara's scarf had lain. The crew had been dismissed, leaving only the suspects, Drake, Sylvia, Tom and Evelyn, gathered in uneasy silence under the harsh work lights. Their faces betrayed their discomfort. Drake's scowl, Sylvia's poised tension, Tom's fidgeting hands, Evelyn's furtive glances. Miss Marple stood to one side, her needles clicking softly, her eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Craddock took charge, his voice firm. "Thank you for agreeing to this, everyone. We're reconstructing the night Miss Vane died, based on your statements. Move as you did, do what you did. If you remember anything new, speak up." Drake folded his arms, his voice a low growl. "This is ridiculous. I was in my office, rewriting scripts. I've said so a dozen times." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but unyielding. "Indulge us, Mr. Drake. Memory can be slippery, and action often clarifies it." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, whose reenactment of a planting had revealed a hidden theft. Drake grunted but complied, stalking to a corner of the set where he mimed flipping through a script, his movements exaggerated. Sylvia, her green dress catching the light, glided to the centre, reciting lines from the Crimson Veil with icy precision, her eyes fixed on an imaginary Clara. Tom scurried to a prop table, sorting candelabras with nervous energy, his glances darting toward the chair. Evelyn lingered at the edge, clutching her photograph, her lips moving silently as if in prayer. Miss Marple watched, her needles a steady rhythm, her mind tracing their paths. Sylvia's grace was almost too perfect, her steps avoiding the chair with a care that felt rehearsed. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead actress, whose careful avoidance of a rival's shawl had betrayed her guilt in a petty theft. "Miss Grey," she called softly, "you move so elegantly. Did you pass by Miss Vane's chair that night? Perhaps to adjust a prop?" Sylvia's step faltered, her smile tight. "No, Miss Marple, I was focused on my lines, nowhere near her chair." Her voice was smooth, but her eyes flicked to the velvet cushion, where the scarf had rested. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze shifting to Tom, whose hands trembled as he lifted a candelabra. "Tom," she said, her tone kind, "you were fetching props, you said. Did you move the chair at all, to reach something behind it?" Tom froze, his face reddening. No, ma'am. I just grabbed the candelabra and left. Didn't touch the chair." His voice cracked, and he looked away, his fingers twisting the prop. Evelyn, still at the edge, seemed to shrink into herself, her eyes fixed on the chair as if it held Clara's ghost. Miss Marple approached her, her voice gentle. "Miss Marsh, you were near the set watching Miss Vane. Did you see anyone near her scarf?" Evelyn's hands tightened on the photograph, her voice barely audible. I didn't notice. I was watching her, not the chair." Her eyes glistened, and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. Drake, growing impatient, threw up his hands. "This is pointless. I wasn't here, and you're wasting my time." He stormed toward the exit, but Craddock's sharp voice stopped him. "Stay, Mr. Drake, we're not done." Craddock's eyes met Miss Marple's, a silent acknowledgement of her lead. The reenactment continued, the suspects repeating their movements under Miss Marple's watchful gaze. She noted how Sylvia's path curved near the chair, close enough to touch the scarf if she chose. Tom's nervous energy kept him circling the prop table, his glances toward the chair betraying an unease that went beyond shyness. Evelyn's stillness was unnatural, her eyes locked on the spot where Clara had died, as if reliving a moment she couldn't share. Drake's bluster filled the space, but his movements were confined to the edges, far from the scarf's resting place. During a pause, Miss Marple approached Sylvia, her needles still clicking. "You know this set so well, Miss Grey," she said, her tone conversational. "Every step, every angle. You must have seen Miss Vane's scarf often lying there." Sylvia's smile was a mask, her hands smoothing her dress. "I suppose so. It was always there, part of her presence." Her voice held a faint edge, a note of resentment that Miss Marple caught like a snag in her knitting. She turned to Tom, who was wiping sweat from his brow. "And you, Tom, always so busy for Miss Vane. Did you ever move her scarf, perhaps to tidy up?" Tom shook his head vehemently, his eyes wide. "Never touched it, ma'am. It was hers. I wouldn't." His voice was earnest, but his hands betrayed him, clenching into fists. Miss Marple glanced at Evelyn, who had retreated further into the shadows. "Miss Marsh, you loved watching Miss Vane. Did you ever pick up her scarf, just to feel closer to her?" Evelyn's face crumpled, her voice a whisper. "Number I wouldn't dare. It was hers, like a piece of her." Her fingers stroked the photograph, the ink smudged stark against the worn paper. Craddock signalled the end of the reenactment, and the suspects dispersed, their unease lingering like the rain outside. As they left the set, he turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "Did you see what you hoped? They're all jumpy, but Sylvia's the one who kept near that chair." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes distant. "Indeed, Inspector. Sylvia's grace is a performance, but her steps were too careful, as if she knew where the scarf lay. Tom's fear is real, but is it guilt or something else?" Evelyn's silence speaks louder than her words, and Drake's absence from the scene is too convenient. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead play, where the villager's hesitation on stage had revealed a hidden theft. The scarf was no accident, Inspector. Someone chose it, and this reenactment showed us how close they all were. Craddock rubbed his chin. Sylvia's motive is strongest. She'd get the role. But Tom's nerves and Evelyn's obsession, they're not clean either. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts weaving the clues, the green bead, the talcum, the ink, the moved chair, into a pattern. A motive is only part of the truth, Inspector. The scarf was a choice, a message. Sylvia's ambition burns bright, but we must not overlook the quieter passions. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead widow, whose silent resentment had erupted in a single devastating act. The reenactment had shown her the suspects' movements, but their hearts remained the final stage. At her hotel that evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm. The pink shawl grew. its lace a mirror of her thoughts. Sylvia's careful steps, Tom's trembling hands, Evelyn's haunted eyes, Drake's distant bluster. They were players in a tragedy, and the scarf was their script. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen small acts reveal great truths, and here she sensed the truth was near, waiting for the right question to draw it into the light. Chapter 10. The Alibi Unravels. The rain had ceased by noon, leaving Pinewood Studios under a sky of shifting clouds that cast fleeting shadows across the lot. Miss Jane Marple, her umbrella folded but her tweed coat still damp at the hem, walked with a measured step toward the studio's security office, her knitting bag a quiet companion. Inspector Craddock strode beside her, his notebook worn at the edges, his face etched with the tension of a case that grew more tangled with each revelation. The reenactment had sharpened their focus on Sylvia Grey's careful steps near Clara Vane's scarf, Tom Harris's nervous glances, Evelyn Marsh's haunted silence, and Lionel Drake's conspicuous absence from the set. Yet the truth remained elusive, a shadow moving just beyond reach. Now, a new thread had emerged, a witness who could unravel Sylvia's alibi. Craddock had received a report from a janitor, a wiry man named Bert, who claimed to have seen Sylvia leave her dressing room around midnight, heading toward the soundstage. The news had stirred Miss Marple's curiosity, for Sylvia's poised insistence on solitude had rung false, like a line delivered without conviction. In St. Mary Mead, she had known women like Sylvia, charming, composed but capable of ruthlessness when their desires were thwarted. The janitor's account, if true, placed Sylvia near the scene of the crime, and Miss Marple intended to tug at this thread until it gave way. The security office was a cramped room, its walls papered with schedules and faded notices, a single desk cluttered with mugs and a flickering lamp. Bert sat waiting, his cap twisted in his hands, his eyes darting nervously as Craddock and Miss Marple entered. He was a small man, his face lined from years of late nights and early mornings, his overalls patched but clean. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her needles emerging to work the pale pink shawl, their soft click a counterpoint to the room's tension. "Bert," Craddock began, his tone steady, "you told my constable you saw Sylvia Grey the night Miss Vane died. Tell us exactly what you saw." Bert cleared his throat, his fingers tightening on his cap. "I was sweeping the corridor near the dressing room, sir, around midnight. Miss Grey came out of hers, looking all in a huff. She headed straight for the soundstage, stage 3, where Miss Vane was found. Didn't see her come back." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "In a huff, Bert? How did she seem?" She thought of Mrs. Price from St. Mary Mead, whose hurried exit from a tea party had betrayed her guilt in a petty scandal. Bert shrugged, his voice low. "Angry, I'd say." Her face was tight, like she was holding something in. She didn't see me, too focused on where she was going. Craddock's pen scratched across his notebook. "You're sure of the time? And that it was Sylvia?" Bert nodded, his eyes steady. "Dead sure, sir. Clock on the wall said midnight, and Miss Grey's hard to miss, with that walk of hers. Like a cat, all smooth and sharp." Miss Marple's needles resumed, her mind weaving Bert's words into the pattern. Sylvia had claimed to be alone in her dressing room, practicing lines, yet here was proof she had ventured out, toward the very place Clara died. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, whose alibi of sewing late had crumbled when a neighbour saw her slip out at dusk. "Did you see anyone else, Bert?" she asked gently. "Near the dressing rooms or the set?" Bert frowned, his cap twisting tighter. "Not then, Mum. Place was quiet, except for the watchman's boots somewhere. But earlier, around 10, I saw that fan, Miss Marsh, lurking near the stage door. Looked like she was waiting for someone." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "And Tom Harris?" "Drake?" Bert shook his head. "Didn't see Tom after 9, when he was fetching props. Mr. Drake was in his office, shouting into the phone. Heard him through the door." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. Bert's account tightened the noose around Sylvia, but Evelyn's presence near the stage door was another thread, as was Drake's loud solitude. She thanked Bert, her smile warm, and they left the office, the drizzle resuming as they crossed the lot. Craddock's voice was grim. Sylvia lied. She wasn't in her dressing room all night. She was on the set near the scarf near Clara. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes scanning the wet cobblestones. "Indeed, Inspector, a lie is a crack in the facade, and Miss Gray's is beginning to show. But we must be careful. Lies can protect as well as condemn." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Vicar, whose false alibi had shielded a parishioner, not himself. Let us confront her, but gently. She may reveal more than she intends. They found Sylvia in her dressing room, adjusting her hair before a mirror. Her green dress replaced by a cream blouse and skirt, her beauty undimmed by the grey light. She rose as they entered, her smile poised, but her eyes wary. "Inspector Miss Marple," she said, her voice smooth. "More questions?" "I've told you all I know." Craddock's tone was firm. "Not quite, Miss Gray. A witness saw you leave your dressing room around midnight, heading for the soundstage. You said you were here alone all night." Sylvia's smile faltered, her hands pausing on the vanity. "Midnight? I must have stepped out for a moment to clear my head. Rehearsing gets stifling." Her voice was light, but her fingers betrayed her, gripping the edge of the table. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her gaze gentle but piercing. "A walk, Miss Gray?" "Toward the soundstage, where Miss Vane was found, and so close to her scarf, lying there on her chair." She thought of Miss Lavinia Gray, Sylvia's cousin, whose excuses for a late-night stroll had unravelled a deception. Sylvia's eyes flicked to the mirror, seeking her own reflection. "I didn't see Clara," she said, her voice sharper. "I walked past the set, yes, but I didn't go in. I needed air, that's all." Craddock leaned forward, his notebook open. "You didn't see Clara, but you were near her chair, near the scarf. You argued with her that day, didn't you? About the role of Lady Eleanor." Sylvia's face hardened, a crack in her composure. "We had words, yes. She was impossible, always demanding more, but I didn't touch her scarf, and I didn't hurt her." Her voice rose, a note of defiance breaking through. Miss Marple's needles slowed, her voice soft. "No one doubts your talent, Miss Gray. But that scarf, so personal, so tempting, it was there, wasn't it? A moment's impulse, perhaps, born of frustration." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead actress, whose envy had led to a slashed costume, a petty act that hinted at darker possibilities. Sylvia's hands trembled, and she stood, her eyes flashing. "I didn't touch it. I walked past, that's all. You've no proof otherwise." Her voice was steady now, but her reflection in the mirror showed a woman fighting to hold her mask in place. Craddock made a note, his expression unreadable. "We'll check the set again, Miss Grey. If you remember anything, anyone you saw, tell us." They left her standing by the vanity, her composure fraying like the edges of Clara's scarf. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a damp chill in the air. Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "She's crumbling. That lie about staying in her room, it's damning. And with her motive, the bead, the talcum." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking as they walked toward the soundstage. "Damning, yes, but not complete. Sylvia's ambition is afire, but was it hot enough to kill? We must look again at the set, Inspector. The scarf was taken, but by whose hand?" She thought of a saint. Mary Mead burglary, where a dropped glove had pointed to the thief, not the liar. They returned to stage 3. The Regency drawing room, now a silent witness under the dim lights. Miss Marple knelt by Clara's chair, her fingers brushing the velvet. A new detail caught her eye, a faint scratch on the armrest barely visible, as if a ring or bracelet had grazed it. "Inspector," she said, pointing, "this mark. It wasn't here before. Someone was careless, perhaps in haste." Craddock examined it, his brow furrowing. "Could be Sylvia's. She wears a bracelet, silver, I noticed." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Or another's? Evelyn's locket, perhaps, or Tom's watch. We must match this mark to its maker." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead locket, whose clasp had scratched, a table, revealing a secret meeting. At her hotel that evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a steady rhythm. The pink shawl grew, its lace a mirror of her thoughts. Sylvia's lie was a crack, but the scratch on the chair, the talcum, the bead, they were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a moment of rage or desperation. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen lies protect the guilty and the innocent alike. But here, the truth was close, waiting for the right thread to pull it free. Chapter 11. The Motive. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows of Miss Jane Marple's modest hotel room near Pinewood Studios, casting a soft glow on the chintz curtains and the half-finished pink shawl in her lap. The rain had left a lingering dampness in the air, but the fire crackling in the grate lent a cosy warmth to the room, its flicker mirroring the dance of thoughts in Miss Marple's sharp mind. She sat in a worn armchair, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, while Inspector Craddock paced before her, his notebook open and his face taut with the weight of their investigation. The clues, Sylvia Grey's lie about her midnight walk, the scratch on Clara Vane's chair, the talcum powder, the green bead, the ink-stained scrap, had woven a tapestry of suspicion, but the pattern remained incomplete. Now, as the case drew toward its climax, Miss Marple turned her thoughts to the heart of the matter. Motive. Craddock paused, running a hand through his hair. "We're close, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Sylvia's alibi is shot. She was seen near the set, near the scarf. The bead, the talcum, the scratch, they all point to her. And she had the strongest motive, Clara's role as Lady Eleanor." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. "Indeed, Inspector. Motive is the spark that lights the flame. But we must be certain it's the only spark." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead scandal, where a seemingly obvious motive, jealousy, had masked a deeper grudge over a stolen inheritance. "Let us lay out the threads, shall we?" Craddock pulled a chair closer, his notebook a map of their findings. Sylvia Grey, he began. She wanted the role of Lady Eleanor. Clara's death handed it to her on a silver platter. She lied about staying in her dressing room, and we've got Bert's testimony placing her near the set at midnight. The green bead matches her dress, and the talcum could have come from her vanity. Miss Marple nodded, her needles steady. A compelling case, Inspector. Sylvia's ambition is a fire that burns brightly. She argued with Clara, resented her dominance, and stood to gain immediately from her death. The scarf, so personal, suggests a crime of passion, perhaps sparked by a heated moment. She recalled Miss Lavinia Grey, Sylvia's cousin, whose envy had driven her to sabotage a rival's garden, a petty act that hinted at darker possibilities. Craddock flipped a page. Then there's Lionel Drake. His temper's notorious. Clara's demands were driving him up the wall. He was in his office, he says, but that cigarette stub and the shadow Bert saw suggest he wasn't alone. His pride was at stake, but would he kill to save his film? Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. Mr. Drake's pride is a storm, loud and fierce, but storms pass. Murder requires a colder resolve. His motive is weaker. Clara's death disrupts his vision as much as her demands did. But his lie about solitude troubles me. Who was with him, and why hide it? She thought of Mr. Clements, the St. Mary Mead grocer, whose bluster had concealed a fear of ruin. Craddock continued. Tom Harris, devoted to Clara, maybe too devoted. He was seen near her chair, upset, possibly after she snapped at him. The Polish smudge in the storage room proves he was there, but not for how long. Could he have lashed out, feeling rejected? Miss Marple's needles resumed, her voice soft. Young Tom's devotion is a tender thing, easily bruised. I've seen lads like him in St. Mary Mead, Tommy Pierce, who stole to impress a teacher. But murder? It would take a wound deeper than a scolding. His tears suggest fear, perhaps of what he saw, not what he did. She thought of the script in Tom's hands, its smudge a silent witness to his presence. Craddock's pen tapped his notebook, and Evelyn Marsh. Obsessed with Clara, writing her letters, sending gifts. She felt betrayed when Clara ignored her. That ink-stained scrap near her bench, her lurking near the set. It's suspicious. But she's so fragile. Could she kill? Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Obsession is a river, Inspector, gentle until it floods. Evelyn's adoration turned to pain. But murder requires nerve she may lack. Her silence, though, is telling. She saw something, I think, but fear keeps her quiet. She recalled Mrs. Green, whose fixation on a vicar had led to bitter outbursts, but never violence. Craddock leaned back, his brow furrowed. Sylvia's the strongest. The role, the lie, the proximity, it all fits. The scarf was a moment's impulse, maybe, after their argument. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting a steady rhythm. Sylvia's motive is clear, Inspector. Lady Eleanor was her chance to shine, and Clara stood in her way. The scarf, left on the chair, was a temptation, a personal weapon for a personal grudge. She knew the set, Clara's habits, the scarf's place, the bead, the talcum, the scratch. They point to her hand. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead, actress, whose envy of a rival's role had led to a slashed curtain, a small act that mirrored a larger rage. Craddock's voice hardened. But the others aren't clear. Drake's temper could have snapped. He's no stranger to violence, from what the crew says. Tom's devotion might have turned sour if Clara pushed him too far. And Evelyn, her obsession could have twisted into something dark. Miss Marple's needle slowed, her mind weaving the clues into a pattern. True, Inspector. Each has a motive, but Sylvia's burns brightest. Drake's pride is wounded, not broken. Tom's love is wounded, but not vengeful. Evelyn's pain is deep, but her courage is shallow. Sylvia's gain is immediate, tangible, a role, a spotlight. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Garden, where a single weed had choked a rose, its motive clear in its growth. Craddock closed his notebook, his eyes meeting hers. "You're sure it's Sylvia? We've got evidence, but it's circumstantial. The bead, the talcum, the scratch, they're not a confession." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her eyes sharp. "Circumstance, Inspector, is the scaffolding of truth. Sylvia's lie about her midnight walk, her presence near the scarf, her motive, they build a case, but we must test it gently to see if it holds." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Tea Party, where a careful question had coaxed a confession from a liar. Craddock stood, his resolve firm. "We'll confront her tomorrow, in front of the others. If she cracks, we'll have her." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her thoughts racing. "Yes, Inspector, but we must watch them all. The guilty may confess, but the innocent may reveal more than they know." She thought of the scarf, its silver embroidery a silent accusation, and the chair, its scratch a mark of haste. In St. Mary Mead, she had seen motives laid bare by a single word, and here she sensed the truth was near, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. As Craddock left, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting a rhythm of thought. The pink shawl grew, its lace a mirror of the case's complexity. Sylvia's ambition was aflame, but was it the only one? Drake's pride, Tom's devotion, Evelyn's obsession, they were shadows, but shadows cast by something solid. The scarf, the bead, the talcum, the scratch, they were clues, but the motive was the key. And Miss Marple felt it turning in her mind, unlocking a truth that would soon be revealed. Chapter 12. The Confession. The morning at Pinewood Studios was cloaked in a heavy mist, the kind that clung to the skin and blurred the edges of the world, lending an air of unreality to the sprawling lot. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the damp, stood on the threshold of Stage 3, her knitting bag a quiet weight at her side. The Regency drawing-room set loomed behind her, its velvet drapes and gilt mirrors muted under the dim safety lights, as if holding its breath for the final act. Inspector Craddock stood beside her, his face set with the resolve of a man who sensed the end of a chase. The clues, Sylvia Grey's lie, the green bead, the talcum powder, the scratch on the chair, the ink-stained scrap, had woven a net of suspicion, and today Miss Marple intended to draw it tight. The suspects had been summoned to the set for what Craddock called a final clarification, though Miss Marple knew it was a stage for truth to step forward. Lionel Drake, Sylvia Grey, Tom Harris and Evelyn Marsh stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a study in unease. Drake's scowl deep and thunderous, Sylvia's composure a brittle mask, Tom's hands fidgeting with a prop candelabra, Evelyn's eyes darting to the photograph she clutched. The crew had been dismissed, leaving the soundstage silent save for the faint hum of electricity and the distant patter of rain on the roof. Craddock cleared his throat, his notebook open but untouched. "We've gathered you here," he began, his voice steady, "because new evidence has come to light. One of you knows more about Clara Vane's death than you've admitted. It's time to speak." Drake folded his arms, his voice a growl. This is absurd. I've told you, I was in my office, working. You've no proof otherwise." Tom's face paled, his fingers tightening on the candelabra. "I didn't do anything. I was in storage, like I said." His voice trembled, a boy caught in a storm. Evelyn's lips moved silently, her eyes fixed on the photograph as if it could shield her. "I loved her," she whispered. "I'd never hurt her." Sylvia stood tall, her cream blouse pristine, her smile a delicate curve. "I've answered your questions, Inspector. I walked to clear my head, nothing more." Miss Marple stepped forward, her needles still in her bag, her eyes bright and unyielding behind her spectacles. "A walk, Miss Grey?" she said, her voice gentle but piercing, like a needle through silk. "At midnight, toward the set where Clara Vane died, where her scarf lay, so temptingly, on her chair." She thought of a saint. Mary Mead tea party, where a single question had unravelled a liar's composure. Sylvia's smile faltered, her hands smoothing her skirt. "I told you, I didn't go in. I passed by, that's all." Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Passed by, yet so close to the scarf, Miss Grey. A scarf you knew well, embroidered with Clara's initials, left where anyone could see it. And you, with your ambition burning so brightly, the role of Lady Eleanor, yours if Clara was gone." She recalled Miss Lavinia Grey, Sylvia's cousin, whose envy had poisoned a village friendship, a shadow of the same fire. Sylvia's eyes flashed, but her voice remained cool. "Ambition? I'm an actress, Miss Marple. We all want the best roles, but I didn't kill for it." Miss Marple's voice softened, her tone almost maternal. "No one doubts your talent, my dear, but talent can be overshadowed, can it not? Clara was the star, the centre of every scene. You argued with her that day, about screen time, about lines. You were seen near her chair, where the scarf lay, and a bead from your dress was found there, caught in the velvet." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, whose dropped thread had betrayed her theft. Sylvia's hands clenched, her composure cracking. "A bead? That proves nothing. This set is a mess. Things fall all the time." Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. "And the talcum powder, Miss Grey? On the scarf, on the chair, matching the tin in your dressing room. And the scratch on the armrest, made by your bracelet, perhaps, in a moment of haste?" Sylvia's face paled, her eyes darting to the chair, then back to Craddock. "You're twisting things. I didn't touch her scarf. I didn't touch her." Miss Marple's eyes held Sylvia's, gentle but unrelenting. "You saw your chance, didn't you? A moment alone, the scarf within reach, your anger at Clara's dominance boiling over. A quick act, born of frustration, but planned in your heart." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead actress, whose envy had led to a slashed costume, a small act that echoed a larger rage. Sylvia's breath hitched, her hands trembling. The others watched, frozen, Drake's scowl deepening, Tom's eyes wide, Evelyn's photograph trembling in her grip. The silence stretched, taut as a wire, until Sylvia's voice broke it, a whisper at first, then a sob. "She didn't deserve it," she said, her eyes glistening. "I was better. I am better. She took everything, every line, every look. I just wanted my chance." Craddock's voice was low, steady. "What happened, Sylvia? Tell us." Sylvia sank onto the chair, her hands covering her face. "We argued that night. She laughed at me, said I'd never outshine her. I went back to the set, saw her alone, the scarf there. I didn't plan it. I just grabbed it and—" Her voice broke, tears streaming. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice held no judgment, only clarity. A moment's impulse, Miss Grey, but one rooted in envy. The scarf was her crown, and you took it. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, whose rage had flared in a single devastating act, regretted too late. Craddock signalled a constable, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "Sylvia Grey, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara Vane." His voice was formal, but his eyes held a trace of pity as Sylvia was led away, her sobs echoing in the silent stage. Drake exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "Good God," he muttered, "all for a role." Tom's hands shook, his face pale. I thought she cared about Clara." Evelyn clutched her photograph, her eyes distant. "She wasn't a goddess," she whispered. "Not anymore." Miss Marple watched them go, her needles emerging to resume their rhythm. The mist outside had thickened, shrouding the lot in grey. Craddock turned to her, his voice low. "You saw it from the start, didn't you? Sylvia's ambition." Miss Marple's smile was faint, her eyes distant. "I saw a pattern, Inspector, as I've seen in my village. Ambition, pride, love, obsession. They are the same everywhere, dressed in different costume." She thought of Saint, Mary Mead, where small acts revealed great truths. And here, in the artificial world of the studio, human nature had played its familiar role. As she returned to her hotel, her knitting bag at her side, Miss Marple felt the weight of the case lift, though a quiet sadness lingered. The pink shawl was nearly complete, its lace a testament to her patient unravelling of lies. Sylvia's confession had closed the curtain, but the stage of human passion, she knew, would always open anew. She sat by the fire that evening, her needles clicking, her mind already turning to the next puzzle. For in St. Mary Mead or Pinewood Studios, the hard secrets never stayed hidden long.